Happy Monday. It's Kimberly Beer here with Make It Happen Monday. One thing you can do this week to better market your business. And today we're going to be taking an exploration into SSL certificates. So this may sound like a really boring subject, and it also may sound like, hey, maybe I don't even need this. But trust me, if you have a business website, you need to know what SSL is. And I've had a lot of questions over the past week about, do I really need an SSL certificate? What does an SSL do? What even is this bizarre acronym that affects my life, especially with Google? So today we're going to be talking about everything you need to know about SSL, but didn't even know you needed to ask. So let's start out by understanding what an SSL is. SSL is a secure sockets layer. That is the acronym, what SSL stands for. And basically what it does is it creates an encryption in the information that's passed between the computer and the server where your website is hosted, so that that information is passed along safely. In other words, it's not just some type of typical characters or binary code that a hacker or someone who wants to get a hold of that information can grab onto and then use. So we're all aware of hackers these days, right? And to be honest with you, it's probably way more prevalent than we're even aware of. So people exploit, hackers, I'm not even going to give them the term people, hackers exploit any place that they can find where they can get customer information. And you may think to yourself right now, I don't get credit card information and I really don't ask for people's information on my website. Well, that's not true. You do. If you're doing your marketing correctly, you should at the very least be collecting information for your email marketing database. And if you're using a form on your website, not necessarily the form that's set up by like Constant Contact or a landing page through Keep or something like that. But if you are using a form on your website that's passing that information along to those email service marketing service providers, then yes, you are collecting people's information, and yes, you are passing it along, and it needs to be encrypted in its journey, because there is some obnoxious person out there, hacker, waiting to grab that information and use it for whatever purposes that they can. Now, the more personal the information, the more necessary it really is for you to have the SSL. So somebody's name and email address is a pretty personal connection. But people sometimes go beyond that in what they collect on their website. They'll collect addresses, they'll collect phone numbers, and even more detailed information. And then, of course, we all are aware of the fact that financial information definitely needs to be encrypted, because if one of those hackers gets a hold of a credit card number, then that can spell disaster. So basically what SSL does is it buffers that relationship so that there are walls around it and the information is encrypted so that it is secure between your website and the person's computer that is displaying the website. An SSL certificate is purchased from your hosting or domain service company. The cost is anywhere from $39 to $129 annually and up. There are levels of SSL certificates, the most common of which is called the domain validation. And that will, for most of you at the level that listen to this show in your business, that'll get you pretty much everything that you need. There's another step up called an organization validation that really is meant for businesses, and basically what it does is it just verifies that you're a business. And then there's something called extended validation that is really there for LLCs and corporations and nonprofits and really public facing companies that need to have that extra layer. Now, the reality is that the general public doesn't know the differences. The general public only knows that if you don't have an SSL certificate, actually, they don't even know that part. The general public just knows if they go to your website and there's not a little lock, that means that your website isn't secure. And so they don't trust you. And I'm going to explain what the little lock means a little bit further down the road. But that lock is really important. And so let's take a look at what that means. Okay, so when your SSL is installed, next to your URL, so your domain name, there's a little lock. Now, this particular example was shot in Chrome, but it's true in every browser that is out there. There's going to be a little lock next to the domain name. And that lock is going to tell the user that that connection is secure. That means that any information that they put into this website, as long as that little lock is there, means that that information is protected when it goes out. Now, there's some other indicators that we're going to get to in a moment that indicate that the connection is secure. But if you click on the lock in Chrome, you're going to get this report that tells you that your information is private when it's passed to this site, and that in this particular case, the certificate is valid. That means it's been installed. That there are cookies on this website that track your information when you put it in. Those are forms. Those are tracking things from Google Analytics. There's hundreds of ways that you can get cookies on your website. And I'm going to tell you, even as a website designer, you'll be surprised when you go in, or a website owner, you'll be surprised when you go in and see how many cookies are actually installed on your website. This number of 64 actually shocked me a little bit. I'm like, wow, do I really collect that much information from people who come to my site? But by the time you get all of the information collected, like Google Analytics, or I have some other things on my site that encourage people to put in their information, I most certainly do collect a lot of information, and I probably don't collect as much as some other people out there do. So when you see that and you see a high number, don't judge the business, because every little piece counts, right? And then there are some site settings that you can click on to see more information about the whatever website that it is that you are visiting. But this being a secure connection is really important, because the alternative looks, here, let me dive in here. It looks like this, where it says not secure. Now, the difference is that there's an S after the HTTP. So let me explain what that means. So every time you enter a URL out onto the web, it is going to go through what's called a hypertext transfer protocol. So it always starts with HTTP. That's what that acronym stands for. When the connection is secure, there's going to be an S after the HTTP. And if you look at the example here for bemorebusiness.com, we have HTTPS:// excuse me. That means that this site is secure, that there is an SSL certificate installed. So the HTTPS is important. If that S is missing, and the certificate is not installed, so when the user types in the website URL and their computer goes out and looks on the internet and says, hey, I want to make a connection with you, it'll ask it, are you a secure website? And it'll come back and say no. And if it is secure, then it'll have that S. And if it's not secure, then it'll come up with this not secure, or it'll just have HTTP. Now, I always tell people that when you are putting any kind of information that is critical into a website, just as the general public, just as a user, always make sure that there's an HTTPS. That means at the very least that company has had to go through a domain validation process, which means that they actually own the domain they say they're coming from. Now, what happens in the world of scamming and hackers is there's these things called phishing scams, where maybe a company, let's say they want to spoof PayPal. So they can take a guess that a lot of us have PayPal accounts, right? So if they get somebody's email address by snatching it out of the thin air that happens when they're not encrypted, then they can send a email to that email address, and what they'll do is make it look like it comes from PayPal. It'll have PayPal's logo. You can grab those right off the internet. It'll have information. in the email that sounds valid, like your PayPal account has been compromised, click here to change your password. Well, what happens was when you click on that button, if you look at the URL, because it's going to take you to a web page, right? If you look at the URL, it's not going to be PayPal's URL. It's not going to be paypal.com. It'll be something off, like it'll be PAVPAL or something like that. Something that at one glance is going to look legit, but if you actually read it, it is not legitimate. So, and a lot of times these will have HTTP versus HTTPS, which means that the connection isn't secure. Anytime you get an email asking you to click and log into a website where you have not specifically just requested to do that, then you need to be really conscientious that that's probably a hacker and it's probably a phishing scam. And if you put any kind of sensitive information in there, or it is accessing your sensitive information, like you change your password, well, what do they ask when you change your password? They always ask for the old password, right? Well, now they've got the password to your PayPal account or whatever account it happens to be. So just be really careful as a general user of internet technology that when you enter your information into websites, it is vulnerable, and that there are people out there that are willing to take advantage of it. All right, we got off the topic of SSLs just a hair there, but I want you to understand why out there in the public, out there amongst your users and your customers, there's a real stigma that comes with this not secure designation. You may not collect any information on your website that could be used by a hacker, but I'm going to explain to you why your public worries about that. They won't hang out on your website. And Google in particular, Chrome, has a really bad habit of displaying in like gigantic letters across the center of your screen that the site isn't secure. It doesn't always do that, but it does it enough that if you don't have a secure certificate installed, a user comes there and goes, hey, I don't want to hang out here. Now the trust in your company just plummeted, right? They aren't even sure you're legit. Your website is just off. So that basically an SSL certificate will cure that. So why you should have an SSL certificate? Obviously, it keeps the information between your site and the great out there as secure as possible, and meaning away from hackers. And the information that's passed between the server and your customer's computer and your website, all of that is encrypted and as secure as it possibly can be. It establishes trust with your customer. That's really important. We just spent a little bit of time talking about that. And also Google will rank your site higher in search returns because they understand that when they send somebody to an insecure website or a site without an SSL, that a lot of times those warnings appear and the people will leave. Well, just always remember, and I keep harping on this, that Google's customer is not you as a business. Google's customer is that person who is searching, and they want that searcher to be as happy as possible. And they know that for their searchers, that little lock and the fact that the site is secure is truly an important piece of them staying on the site and getting the information that they want. And it keeps those horrible not secure warnings off your website as well. All right, how do you get an SSL certificate? The first thing you can do is you can purchase it from your domain or hosting company, and you're going to install the certificate on the domain. Now, you can buy an SSL certificate from a third-party company. I've actually done that. It's a pain in the butt. Typically, what I recommend is that you buy the SSL from the company that you get your domain from. Not necessarily the hosting, but definitely the domain. Install the certificate on the domain. The specific SSL provider, domain, and hosting companies will provide you with a how-to. And sometimes you have to pick up the phone and ask, especially if you're not a techno nerd, because there's different procedures for, it seems like, for every different company. And I'm not going to get into the exact how-tos, and there's a variety of scenarios that can happen depending on where you have your domain registered, where your hosting is, and where your SSL certificate is purchased. Now, in an ideal world, all three of those things live in the same place. And if they do, typically, it's a really easy procedure where you click a couple of buttons and that's that. Because the SSL can verify that you own the domain. SSL provider can verify that you own the domain, and then the domain is obviously connected to a hosting account, so everything is all cool. But I'm going to tell you, if you have those spread out over different places, then there's a little finagling that has to go on, and it's unique to each scenario. So always start with wherever you buy the SSL from. Look through their user documentation or give them a call. All right, renew your SSL annually and keep it renewed to avoid issues in having those crazy not secure website warnings come up or not secure across the top of the site. It is best to keep your SSL, like your domain and your hosting, on an auto renew basis with wherever you are purchasing them, so that you don't have to worry about the SSL going down. It is one of those things as well that you don't have a ton of grace period time on. In other words, they don't continue to provide a secure connection after your SSL has expired. You have to renew this thing, and you have to renew it however you go about renewing it. So you can buy them for several years if you want to do that, and then they'll stay installed. If you decide to move your website from a host to host or change your domain registrar or stuff like that, you will need to uninstall and reinstall your SSL. However, routine changes and maintenance inside your site is not going to bother this thing, so you're perfectly fine with it. Once you pay for it and get it installed, and if you keep the renewals up, unless you go moving companies around with your providers, it really is not a pain in your butt, other than you're going to have to pay for it every year. Credit card processing in SSL. So here's something else that you need to understand. If you use a checkout, let's say that you are having people purchase something through PayPal or Stripe, or even you have Shopify or some type of dedicated e-commerce system, they offer the handling of the credit cards through a higher level security and better encrypting than probably you're going to want to pay for on your own website. So regardless, once you send somebody over to PayPal or to Stripe, or you send them to check out in one of these dedicated e-commerce solutions, the SSL piece is really handled for you. And you don't have to worry about your credit cards folks having their information at risk. If you, on the other hand, are collecting financial information on your website, where you're collecting it through a form on the website, then it's like sent back to your office in an email or something, which is a huge no-no, by the way, then you have to process that information. That is highly not secure. And so you should definitely not do that without an SSL, and you should never, ever, ever, ever send financial information in any shape or form through email, because email is definitely not always secure. So don't ever do that. So make sure you have some type of a third-party company to handle it, or you have something installed on your website that processes those payments or sends them back to you in an encrypted form where you have to log in and go through a security procedure in order to get to it. Financial information is nothing to mess with. And to think that small companies can get in trouble with it, absolutely. And if you think that bigger ones are immune, I just read some headlines. I mean, I know that there have been several organizations that have been in the news because they had data breaches. And I believe one of those was Kohl's. Yeah, I don't know exact names. I can't remember. I know we've had several huge ones. Oh, it was Target. That was it. Target had a big data breach. So it can happen to anybody. Hackers are very wise, and they are very malicious and can figure a lot of things out that are above and beyond. And just because you're a small business, though, don't think you're immune from this. I've had clients in the past year whose websites have gotten hacked by Bitcoin miners, actually by companies that sell porn that are using some of the information on the website in order to target people for that. And believe me, the website had nothing to do with anything that would lead you to that conclusion. So there's people out there that are going to do bad things, and the general public knows about it because they hear it in the news headlines. And so as a business owner, you need to have this installed, the SSL installed, so that you can provide the highest level of security possible, and take due diligence in keeping the information for your customers safe and secure, and building trust within your brand and your company, which is why this all has to do with marketing. All right, so if you don't have an SSL certificate, your mission this week is to go out and get one and get it installed on your website. If you do, hopefully this gave you a little bit more understanding of why you pay that fee annually to your hosting or domain company, and a little bit more information about why, when your website designer asks you to renew your SSL, that is a necessity. So thank you and have a great week, and I'll see you next Monday.